It's a very difficult thing. It goes back to when you have one theory replacing another theory. It's called paradigm shifts. And in history of science, paradigm shifts have been met with great resistance. The clearest one was the Copernican revolution, when for 1,800 years, astronomers in our early astronomers thought the Earth was immovable in the center of the solar system. For 1,000, this was Claudius Ptolemy, Aristotle, and the Bible, and all these. Earth is immovable, and the sun and the moon and the planets all revolve around the Earth. 1,800 years. Even Copernicus was working with these mathematical formulations. His Kep was being constantly confused until he said, what happens if we put the sun in the center of the solar system and consider the Earth as simply another planet that would revolve? Oh, all of a sudden things started to make sense. And Giordano Bruno, a theologian, was put to death for suggesting that Copernicus was right. There was a tremendous resistance on the part of the Roman Catholic Church at that time. And this is the same thing that happened when Louis Pasteur said that germs, rather than bad air, are the cause of disease. So, and when Darwin Wallace's theory of evolution came, it's not special creation, it's natural selection that can explain this. These were massive paradigm changes in the history of science. And what we're seeing today is the same thing. The mitochondria is the center of the problem with cancer, not the nucleus. The mitochondria, it's a mitochondrial metabolic disease. And once you realize that, we're going to drop these death rates massively in a number of years, for sure. Metabolic therapy can be used to not only prevent the cancer, but can also be used to treat the cancer. We have almost 2 million new cases diagnosed per year in the United States. And we have 1,700 people a day dying from cancer in the United States, which comes to about 70 people per hour in the United States. So there seems to be no reduction in deaths, suffering for this disease. And I can speak to the reasons for that. But right now, I would say it's a global epidemic of cancer. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. More people are dying from it. There's no major advance in reducing death rates. So it's a great tragedy. And when we understand what's causing it and what we're not doing to prevent it or treat it, it'll be recognized as the singular greatest tragedy in the history of medicine worldwide. When they come to know what I know about this disorder, and then they realize what we've been doing in a misdirected way, it'll be recognized as the greatest tragedy in the history of medicine. You look under the microscope and you see a bunch of cells that are dysmorphic in the way they look, and then they all have genetic defects and all this kind of stuff. But they all have one thing in common. They depend on a fermentation, energy without oxygen. So all cancers are a singular type of disease. It's just that they happen in different tissues. But when you look at the underlying problem, they're all very, very similar. They can't live without a fermentation, which means energy without oxygen. The higher your blood sugar, the faster the tumor grows. The lower the blood sugar, the slower the tumor grows. Undeniable for all different human, mouse cancers. Wow. So Warburg had said this a long time ago, back in the 1920s. He was taking slices of all kinds of human and rat, mouse tumors and slicing them up. And he noticed something really strange about these cancers. They take in less oxygen compared to the normal tissue from which they came. Wow, so they're kind of like oxygen deprived. And they were throwing out this lactic acid waste product that he was saying. And they were taking in so much more glucose than the normal. So the normal cells take in just a little bit of glucose and they can make tremendous energy from a tiny amount. This guy was taking in huge amounts of glucose, but not fully metabolizing it to CO2 and water, but dumping it out as lactic acid, which is a breakdown product of glucose that is not fully metabolized in the cell. Wow, he said, this is unbelievable. And then he did all kinds of tissue. I looked at his data. It was unbelievable. He was cutting humans, mice, rats, and seeing the same thing over and over again. And he was saying the origin of cancer has to do with something in the ability of the mitochondrion, the organelle, to generate efficient energy from oxygen. To manage cancer without toxicity is to simultaneously restrict the two fuels that are needed to drive this dysregulated growth, while transitioning the whole body off to a fuel that the tumor cells can't use, which is fatty acids and ketone bodies. So when we take the cancer patients or the mice, we put them into a calorie restriction, lowering the blood sugar, that I said is 1/2 of the two fuels. You can lower that down really, really low. And then we use specific drugs to target the glutamine. And together we can selectively restrict the two fuels while we transition the whole body over to ketones. We, as a species, evolved to be in nutritional ketosis for the majority of our existence as a species, like 1.5 million years. For centuries and centuries, thousands and thousands of years, our species, you and me, our ancestors, were always in a state of nutritional ketosis because there was very few carbohydrates in the environment for them to be consuming, right? So the cancer cell, the body, you and I could, if we stopped eating and we took a low carbohydrate diet and just did water only fasting, we would get into nutritional ketosis, where the normal cells, our brain, our kidneys, our heart, can be burning these ketone bodies because they have a good mitochondria and they can burn these fuels effectively. The tumor cells have a bad mitochondria. They can't burn those fuels. They're dependent on glucose and glutamine. We can replace glucose and glutamine with ketone bodies in the normal cells of our. So we selectively marginalize these tumor cells slowly over time. They slowly start to die, the blood vessels disappear, and the body comes in and dissolves them. It's very hard to really chronically damage mitochondria. Mitochondria are a tough organelle. The problem is we chronically abuse it without realizing what we need to do to keep it healthy. So even if you are exposed to chemical carcinogens, even if you are exposed to all these things, but you're keeping your body as healthy as you possibly can, you could possibly delay or even prevent the damage to the mitochondria, even though you are being exposed to this. So it's actually in your hands. You can actually reduce risk for cancer by knowing what keeps your mitochondria healthy. But look at our diet and lifestyle situation today. Those things that I'm talking about, lack of exercise, a lot of stress, poor sleep, bad food, all of this kind of stuff impacting parts of our bodies. I am very hopeful because when the science comes, you can't suppress the truth. It's going to come out. The evidence, the scientific evidence is there. I'm documenting this scientific, and it's based on the shoulders of Otto Warburg. Are you kidding me? I mean, this was a giant in the field of biochemistry. It's not like I made this stuff up. I'm just extending what he has done to a new dimension and putting it into a practical application, which he had never done. So it's just an extension of the knowledge base over this time. I want to see the scientific principles substantiated. If you know that you can keep these people alive at a higher quality of life based on the knowledge of the science that's doing that, that's gratification, man. It's gratification to know that because you were right on understanding the mechanism of the problem. And if you say, if we do it the way, we're writing a big treatment protocol as we speak, it's under review, a really comprehensive treatment protocol. And we institute that in the clinic, and for glioblastoma patients and these advanced cancers, they're not living a few extra months, they're living several years longer. Why? Because you knew the science. What's wrong with that? That's gratification. You don't have to make $1 billion on that. All you have to know is that all those folks are living longer because you understood the science that was put into practical application. I'm sorry that the medical establishment has not come to recognize what I'm saying. And then I tell them, right, it's the change has to be coming from the people. It ain't going to come from the top medical schools. They are doing what they're doing. The status quo is very profitable. The status quo is very effective for these people, but it's not helping the cancer patient as well as it can. And don't forget, we're not throwing out all this stuff. We're just asking people to know how to use the tools we have in a better way. We don't have to throw out immunotherapies, radiation. We don't have to throw out toxic poisons. We just have to know better how to use it when the patient is in this new state. And the data will prove it. But who's going to do that? Who's going to do that? The doctor says, I'd love to do this, but I'm going to lose my license if I do it. What's going on with that? They wrote the standard of care as if it were in granite. It can't be changed. No, it should be flexible. When new evidence comes, I don't believe your evidence. What number do you not believe? What piece of science do you not believe on this? Well, I haven't read it. You can't be right when 99% of the world says it's this way and you're saying it's something different. That's confirmation bias. You're not looking at the numbers. And then when they get cancer, it comes to, hey, what can you do for me? You know, it's like that. But yes, it has to change. It will change because we're on the momentum to move it. It's people are coming to know this. And once the change happens, it's going to be like a major change.